Welcome to the session. This is titled The Launch of the Clean Air Accelerator, Going Beyond Plans to Implement and Scale Up Air Quality Improvement Solutions in Cities. Today, we are joined by esteemed panelists. We have Dr. Santosh Harish from Open Philanthropy, Ms. Mugdha Jain from the Clean Air Fund, Dr. Anumita Roy Chaudhary from the Center of Science and Environment, Dr. Shri Harsha Kota from IIT Delhi, and Dr. Prakash Duraiswamy from WRI-India. The moderator for the session will be Mr. Madhav Pai, CEO of WRI-India, and the Clean Air Accelerator will be launched by Mr. Jamshed Godrej, Chairman of WRI-India and Chairman and Managing Director of Godrej and Boyce. A quick round of applause for everyone, please. Thanks. To set the context, I'd invite Mr. Sri Kumar Kumaraswamy, the Director for the Clean Air Program, to give a short presentation. Thanks.
Thanks everyone for joining. This is a great honor, an important moment for us, and we hope that this will be you'll find this interesting. The point is here we are trying to see how we can scale up air quality action in number of cities across the country. And this program we invite Jamshed Godrej to launch. Before that, I will just do a quick introduction, what we are doing, what we are talking about. So, air pollution is caused by everyday, any kind of economic activity, any kind of household activity, right? We are all responsible for it. When we say we are all responsible for it, then how are we deciding who need to act and who will do the carrots, who will do the sticks, and how do we ensure that this happens in a systematic way? Yes, government is important, but we are also important. Everyone here is important. So the government has already taken a great step of mainstreaming air quality action, and the targets are really commendable, what has been kept. But how are we reaching it? Where are we in terms of reaching this 40% reduction of PM 2.5 and 10 in next few years? So when we see there are number of barriers which the cities, so we are talking about the role of cities in this. Where do cities stand in achieving this reduction in air pollution, and where are we really faring, right? So the main problems are, as we understand, are lack of local technical capabilities to be able to actually demonstrate this on the ground, and improve coordination among agencies. As you know, the sources connect with various different agencies. Each sources are or sort of dealt with by a different government agency. How do we coordinate? How do we strengthen on a long-term policies? How do we really encourage citizen participation? How do we connect it with everyone? How everybody play a behavioral change role in reducing pollution? And how do we better utilize funds? There is a lot of fund available from the central government. Now, how do we better use this? How do we identify successful solutions, and how do we scale this? So not doing just few pilots. How do we go on to scale? So this is where we are thinking that this Akash will play a key role in bringing these things together. We call this Akash, the Accelerator for Clean Air Actions. The main point here is that how do we centralize action as the central point for the discussion. So some of the main objectives I'll quickly go through. We want to support cities to transition from plans to implementation, right? So all the cities have, because of the NCAP program, they all have prepared some plans. How do we go ensure implementation on the ground? And then how do we leverage data, right? Because of the NCAP, there's a lot of data on the ground now coming from the ground. How do we improve the understanding of data and really include that for decision making? Then how do we equip 30 change makers as a nucleus in these cities who will drive this change forward? We're planning to do this through a systematic way of capacity building and working with them, hand in hand working with them. And then also create a peer platform. We want to understand what are the good things are happening, what are the best practices happening, how do we share, how can we share from each other and learn and take this forward. We're planning to do a series of activities: co-creation of solutions, engaging with stakeholders, working on long-term policy changes, identifying them, data-based understanding, plan strengthening, and project implementation. Right. So these are the 10 cities we are going to engage through this Akash program. Many of them are here as well. The representatives are here, and in the afternoon we also have a session where we will listen to them. What are the good things, successes happening? What are the challenges they are facing, and so on. So this is planned as a 2-year program. We have a capacity building program. Hand in hand, we also start working with them, engaging on doing pilot projects and solutions, and then we also will go towards scaling. So this is just an idea of what we call it as change makers, the government officials in each of the agencies, in cities, young professionals who will be based in the cities and work with them from WRI-India support, with WRI-India support, and then citizen enablers, who are the people from the ecosystem who will work together in through the capacity building. So through this process, what we see is if we can work on identifying and prioritizing solutions, and then help implementing them, understand the impacts of it, and then go on to scale the best practices, and then do again the iterative process of understanding the impact and again identifying solution and so on. So the whole lot of activities we have planned for the next 2 years. I'll stop with this. What are we really talking about in terms of solutions? Air quality is such a complex issue. There is you need action at various scales and various types of actions, and how all these can come together, at and there may be, we may need to stress on some of the areas. How do we strategize, how do we pick from this which is more important, and which are the ones which are easy wins, quick wins we can achieve in this 1-2 years, which are the ones we'll have to really work for on a long term, and so on. So this is what we want to brainstorm today. Hope you will all enjoy and participate, and we really thank our partners here, Open Philanthropy, Bloomberg Philanthropies, and Cleaner Fund for making this happen. Thanks everyone for joining.
Thanks, Sri. I now request Mr. Godrej to formally launch the Clean Air Accelerator and also deliver the keynote address. Thank you.
I will talk a little bit on this. What we launched this this is a portal. This is the capacity building portal, which is going to be used for training the officials and the young change makers and the citizen enablers, the NGOs in the cities. These are the topics. Some of the topics we have we have prepared material on, and we'll also be systematically strengthening this further going forward.
Thanks, Sri. I now request Mr. Godrej to deliver the keynote address.
I think I want to first of all compliment the many organizations and individuals who over the years have been working on this very difficult subject of air pollution. And I also keep telling all my colleagues and friends that despite all the effort and work that's gone in over the years on air pollution, I think we have only scratched the surface and really not been able to make the type of progress that we would like to have seen. And there's no doubt that it becomes a very important subject when we see the air pollution index in our major cities skyrocketing. But otherwise, I think the awareness of that sort of fades. But this is a major problem. Even if the index is 100, it doesn't mean that the air is good. I think we get worried when it's 400 and 500. So how are we going to make that difference? And one thing that I think a lot of people have been talking about is to have full transparency on what's actually happening. And I think if you take all these 10, 15 cities where the work is proposed to be done, I think one of the key things is real-time transparency. And recently, WRI was in Mexico. We had a global board meeting there. And I had the opportunity to visit their monitoring center in Mexico City. And it's really quite remarkable. You know, there are about 50 people, scientists, engineers, social scientists, everyone involved. And I think that they have not only been able to capture, but verify and put it online, all the data throughout the city, Mexico City. And I think that has created the type of awareness amongst the people of Mexico City, which, you know, in the past has been termed as one of the most polluted cities in the world. Because geographically, Mexico City is in a sort of a dip, and it's challenging, to say the least. But the way that they have cleaned up the air, whether it's from transport or other actions, was quite remarkable. And you could see the fact that people really were hungry for that real-time data. And so I think that's one big option before us. I think we must pressurize those in in charge of this issue to really make that information public. I think when the information is public and real time, I think you will see much more interest of people in wanting to make a difference. I think the other thing that I just want to talk about briefly is that this is a complex issue. We all know that there's always a lot of argument about where the pollution is coming from. I think that's not the real issue. The real issue is that we have to stop the pollution from happening wherever it is. The apportionment is, yes, important, but it's secondary to my mind. I think everybody has to realize wherever it's happening, what are the options before them and how do you reduce it? It's not much talk of, it's like talking about cleaning a river. There's no point in trying to clean a river if you're never going to stop the river being polluted. So this is what's turning out to be a really important issue. And I do hope that we can make progress on it, because we all know that health, especially of elderly people, young children, etc., a lot of their, and deaths around that are crucial for well-being. So at the one hand, we talk of the minister talked of smart cities and the progress that's been made, but this is one area where we need to make a lot more progress than we have ever. So thank you for being here, and to all our colleagues here and those who have supported this work over the years, my thanks.
We'll now move into the panel discussion phase of the session. Madhav is the moderator.
Thank you, Prayash. Thank you, Mr. Godrej, for the announcement. So I thought we can jump into the conversation directly. Maybe Anumita, I can start with you. I mean, I think most work also has happened in Delhi over the years. So I think a couple of things, if you can reflect. I mean, now, previously it was mostly talked about in Delhi. I mean, there's almost 20-25 years of work that has happened. So if you can just generally talk about also, as we are thinking about really trying to go for implementation, what might be some of the key challenges, and what can we learn from Delhi in a way to make sure that we are able to sort of move fast in some of these other cities.
Absolutely, Madhav. Thanks a lot for asking that question. I'm very happy to be part of this conversation. So yes, taking from the lessons from Delhi and then connecting with NCAP, right? So clearly, the lesson in Delhi has been so far that when Delhi's struggle with air quality, air pollution started, it didn't. It was not a scripted, which is based on well-defined science, evidence. I mean, imagine when the whole air pollution campaign started in Delhi and the work. I mean, there was so little understanding of what air pollution is, and we were not even monitoring PM 2.5 at that point. It was all about RSPM, the dust, right? So you just had to understand the learning curve globally, understand what kind of action unfolding in different parts of the world, and then try and push for it. And then in an environment when there was very little receptivity and very little engagement, that there was no one on the other side of the table, and they were a lot more confrontational in our approach. So you needed the court, you needed the media, you had to be so loud, you had to be so confrontationist, okay, to first to get heard and then to drive action. Having said that, let's bring it up to speed and see what Delhi has done. Okay, if you really see over the last 25 years, so this is one city today as of now. So all coal power, there were 4 power plants shut, entire public transport, local commercial transport on CNG, 95% of legal industrial area on natural gas. There is a restrictions on the entry of trucks. There is a age cap on vehicles. They have now a clean fuel policy that you can't burn coal or any other dirty fuel in the city. In fact, if you really list this out to the extent that now you're talking about nearly 12% electrification of the new fleet, right? Now, if you list this out, no other city has actually done all of it together. Okay. And yet, after having done all of that, you actually see the stabilization of pollution. You see that you have arrested the trend, and now you're also looking at the bending of the curve, right? Now, even if you say, and what has been submitted by CPCB to the Supreme Court, that we have seen about 25 to 30% reduction over the years, but the bigger challenge is that after doing all of that, you're still looking at another 59% reduction to meet the clean air standard. Now, after doing all of that, what more will you do? Which means all your low hanging fruits are over. And now you really have to go for much harder decisions. Now, to build political and public support for big solutions, and that's where the whole focus is. And that's the lesson for NCAP. So, when we are looking, therefore, the other cities under NCAP today, what you are finding that first, the benchmark for measuring progress is very weak. So your benchmark is dust control, PM10, okay? And then we all got excited, okay, now the planning process has started, funds have started to flow in, ministry telling you about 8,000 crore flowing in under 15 Finance Commission. That's quite a tidy sum. And yet, when you're looking at that, what you are actually achieving, it's not only that, it's again the tip of the iceberg. You're really not seeing any major improvement anywhere. But even in real terms, the funds that have come in, when you see the utilization of that money is in most cases below 25%. Okay, majority are in 25 to 50%. And then the funding and spending is not purposeful. So if it's dust control, so today all cities buying their mechanical sweepers, they are basically sweeping the road and making roads and filling up potholes, right? As a result, the big pollution sources, the combustion sources, your industry, transport, waste, all that's falling through the crack, which means that it's not just about plan and money, and also what Delhi shows that first, that you really need very aggressive strategy, sectoral strategy. Okay, you need to know in each sector what is it that we need to do. Okay, and then to put your money there, and then designing the scope of the action, which is the weakest link today. So if you look at the industry sector, if you really want to see the massive clean fuel transition to happen, states don't go beyond notifying their clean fuel policy, but no agenda to bring in electricity and gas because, the whole pricing doesn't work. You have no infrastructure for the clean fuel, all of that. So similarly in the transport sector, and it's so great to see in this forum today, all the reports that you put out. I mean, today when the action for transport gets reported under clean air action, what you find is just the business as usual. Pollution PUC, and phase out of old vehicles. We have not even understood how to design mobility solution for clean air. So as a result, take Delhi, and that's the biggest lesson. Today, Delhi has started to see increase in bus numbers. Last budget, we have seen massive jump of 35,000 crore for the transport infrastructure. And yet, what we are finding that the average daily ridership of buses in Delhi has fallen by 40%. But they're earning more per kilometer. So it's empty buses, more buses, but empty kilometers, which means you really have no strategy for multimodal integration. And because you don't even see the connection between that strategy and clean air action. So this is where we are making a mistake. And the final point that I just want to raise, with funding and today under NCAP, when you are reporting on progress, they talk about what you have achieved under direct funding of 15 Finance Commission, and the other, which they call, is the convergence funding, which is other funding sources in the sector. Now, wherever you find that there is a specific scheme of the government, like take as the Swachh Bharat Mission, right? Because the scheme has money, and scheme also comes with very clear target that by 2025 you need to have 100% collection, 100% source segregation, 100% remediation of the legacy waste in landfills, and then the cities are monitored against those and very clear and much better sectoral targets. And there we are seeing much better, even though a lot needs to be done there as well, but a lot more progress are getting reported there. So clearly, therefore, what we are saying that the new one, that making those, joining those dots, and second, that the new challenge is about new generation action, about demand management, about smart monitoring, about big data. All these enablers are getting completely ignored at this moment, but we really have to bring that under focus now.
Thank you, Anumita, and lots of questions to come back to, and especially also how we can actually really use learnings from Delhi. And I'll just say from one example, when we were working in Surat and we were trying to come up with guidelines for construction demolition waste, and I remember that there was so much work done in Delhi almost 15 years ago, and there was nowhere for us to even access that information, and we had to start afresh. So I think digging back into Delhi's past and pulling out all of this information also will become a very good repository. So I think that's one thing, and I'll come back to you with a couple more thoughts to build on this. Harsha, I'll ask you this question. Anumita really spoke about like all of these things that have happened, but I think and I know you work a lot in monitoring, and I mean the big challenge is how do we show progress, right? I mean, or at least improvement. So is it even possible, say, if we do interventions, that we are able to systematically then demonstrate that there has been progress on this front? I mean, and what is required for us to sort of make that happen? So say if we have 10 cities, we identify 10 actions, can we report from those 10 actions? Is that even a possibility? How would one go about doing that, if you can talk about a little bit?
So if I understand the question right, talking about will interventions be useful, and are they will they show off results immediately, right? So
if interventions are done, how can we
monitor progress? Right. So what we all miss is when we talk about clean air action plans, we finally talk about change in concentrations. While we miss that, we always should talk about change in emissions. So unless we understand that emissions and concentrations are non-linearly linked, and we just start thinking about reducing concentrations by 40%, 30%, 25% without even understanding how, if you need not, in some cities you need not reduce the concentrations by emissions by 30%, but in some cities you have to reduce the emissions by more than 30% to meet the concentration target. So some interventions will show off results immediately at the local hotspot, but some would not. That depends on the location where the intervention is being implemented. So let me give an example. If you have a big intervention happening at Anand Vihar in Delhi, it will show off. But you have the same intervention happening very close to IIT Delhi, it will not show off. Because some regions have more non-local influence, some do not. So this is where the actual problem of air quality action plans lie in the country. So there are many boundaries in a city. If I would like to point out, boundary is not just the municipal boundary. Most of the clean air action plans are confined to the municipal boundary, and then they tell reduce traffic by 30%, construction dust by 20%, industries by X%, so on and so forth. But we forget that there is X% of non-local emissions flowing into the city, which is resulting in concentration. But this is something most of us know. But the biggest boundary is between the pollution control board and the municipality. Except industries, pollution control board do not have much control on the most of the sources which are a major source of pollution, like road dust, right? So they, most of the pollution control boards do not have much idea where the demolition is happening, right? So in this case, this boundary is something we should again talk more. One more thing which somehow we are falling into a trap what China has done is too much focus on PM 2.5. So India, China, if they started with significant PM 2.5 control, and the studies have shown, the observations themselves have shown that concentrations of ozone have increased. If people are skeptical about this not happening in India, we should check the concentrations of ozone during COVID lockdowns. The ozone concentrations in many of the cities have actually gone up, while the PM 2.5 concentrations have come down. So if our action plans are too much, I'm slightly digressing from your question, sorry, but if our action plans are too much focused on PM 2.5, then ozone might be the next dominant pollutant of AQI, and still, as Godrej was telling, we should not be happy with 100 or 200 AQI. We will tell, okay, our AQI is still high, but ozone, which is more potent, is the dominant pollutant. Now, how do we handle it? It comes to sector specific clean air action plans. So we did a quick simulation, assuming that NCAP gets implemented in the country successfully, what will happen to ozone? So I was surprised personally to see the results. Ozone concentrations will come down as well. So this is, and we also forget one more thing. We are not just worried about clean air, we are also fighting one more demon, which is climate change. If we fight climate change as well, and those interventions are also implemented successfully, even then the air quality in our country would improve significantly. So with this, according to me, the way forward is coming up with sector specific interventions and trying to forecast the effectiveness of each and every intervention in different city. It is not a blind one. If someone tells 30% reduction in construction sector in Delhi would reduce concentrations by 20%, and they try to implement it the same thing in Amritsar, it will not happen. So all your 10 cities will have 10 different results to play with, 10 different kinds of interventions to play with. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think also your point on sort of shifting the conversation maybe from concentration to emissions, especially if we are want to show results in the is an important conversation, and what needs to be done around that could be thought of. It's, I think, a very useful thought. And of course, I think the boundary between municipal action and CPCB is clearly, I think, the big hurdle to jump. So I think, no, thank you very much. I'll come back to you with a few more questions if Santosh, maybe you've been studying the Indian air pollution sort of action for a while, and just curious to also just hear your reflections on this idea that Shri presented of scales, right? I mean, Anumita talked about clean fuel transition. I think you can't work with 5 boilers. No, it is about how to get to 50,000 boilers and create a national program, and that those kinds of things. So there, one is, at the city level, what do you think are the things that we should really go after to work at the city level, and maybe what are the things that might require sort of a next scale approach? So if you can maybe reflect a little bit on that, and just any other sort of observations of how do we move this agenda to more action, right?
Thanks so much. And very excited about the launch of the accelerator. Um, so I think one important place to make progress here is I think taking off from where Harsha Kota left it, right? What we don't have enough of are estimations of how much different policy actions can make a difference, right? So having like the getting the hygiene right, like making sure that there are emission inventories. These emission inventories are open. There are multiple inventories. There is some kind of reconciliation that happens, saying, okay, well, here is what we understand about the emissions coming from this city, from different parts of the city, right, from different sectors, and then being able to use that to actually, estimate a priori the impacts of different interventions and so forth. I think that kind of stuff is sort of important in general to sort of work towards, because it just enables a variety of other things. In terms of actions within cities, I think I wholeheartedly agree with Anumita in that over the last few years, partly as a function of the municipal corporations playing a larger role, partly because we're looking for tangible things to do, partly about how the finance commission grants have sort of incentivized meeting targets of like PM10 reductions. There has perhaps been a slightly somewhat more than ideal emphasis on dust control measures. One key place for us to make progress, frankly, is to like expand beyond that, right? Like other than sort of road dust related interventions, other than tree plantations, and possibly some ad hoc efforts at construction, what else should we be doing for all the other sources that we know exist in the cities? And partly the challenge here is we don't necessarily know, in some sense, what will work. So one reason I'm excited about this project, and one reason why I think we need more initiatives of this kind, is in some sense, sort of replicating the kind of work that CSC has done in Delhi over the years, where they've worked very closely with government, not only in sort of pitching ideas, as it were, but actually helping them design these actions, right? A third important step when we are doing these pilots is making sure that we are evaluating them well. Comes back to your question on like how do we measure progress. I disagree maybe slightly about like not focusing on ultimately, we require relatively easy ways of measuring change over the years, and on things that like ultimately affect our health, which is concentrations. So that being sort of the benchmark against which we judge overall progress, I think is sort of about right. But I would agree that when we are looking at different types of actions, being able to say, okay, हमने ये किया, purely from like process outcomes, right? We were able to implement this to degree X, where that X should be quantifiable in some way or the other, right? Saying that then we estimate would have had an impact of Y on emissions, right? We would expect that it has an impact of Z, but that is there it starts becoming super fuzzy, because then it's completely like based on modeled outputs and so on. Neither are the models nor the inventories perfect, so it could be way off. But I think systematically being able to like get this hygiene right in terms of a priori estimations of impact and systematic evaluations of pilots, and being able to measure them against different types of process output outcome type things, I think that could be really helpful, and something that's so far been missing from the discourse.
And maybe some comment on the scales where we target some interventions. Any thoughts on that?
So I think there's a natural evolution happening here, in that as the emphasis is sort of expanding beyond Delhi, and more state and local governments are sort of engaging, perhaps in some ways for the first time, with air quality, or at least sources of air pollution other than industries, right? that we are in some ways starting small. We are starting at the local type stuff. Again, one reason why maybe we are starting with the dust control type things. But yeah, I think so there are scales of different kinds. One, in terms of progressing from these very sort of micro level actions to airshed level actions, being able to reconcile that without sort of losing perspective. Because I mean, I actually hesitate, I worry a little bit when airshed governance starts becoming a little bit of a buzzword, that more than like a design principle, it sort of becomes like this new goalpost that we are suddenly shifting towards, whereas it should be, I think, a more natural evolution. So there is scale in that. If we had finite resources, which we of course do, how would we prioritize actions at like different levels of government, right? I don't think we're very, I think we're still maybe a couple of years away from that, from a serious conversation about that. But things like common boilers, for example, right? I think this is something that in some ways is like almost like an like, of course that's a good idea. Like, of course you don't want like hundreds of small SMEs running like tiny boilers and running them inefficiently with like suspect solid fuel, and you know, it makes sense then to like to sort of push for common boilers in like industrial areas, being able to monitor those larger boilers like much better than we could ever, you know. So yeah, so that I think a bunch of such ideas that we ought to be like identifying and being able to scale up in different places. Part of, I think this project in general, I think a collective project here is like identifying things that should make sense in any sort of reasonable low-hanging fruits approach. I don't know if we have a, if we have that list. Would you disagree? Do we have that list of like, here are things that would generally work or should generally work?
Yeah, I mean,
Or I mean, is this a solved problem, or is this something I'm making up? Boilers, but like things like boilers. Like, here are 10 ideas that should generally work in most. Sorry, I'm.
No, that's fine. So I mean, we'll come back to that. I think one question, and since we have Mr. Godrej, so you know, I mean, we have been working in Surat, and they've been, you know, that it's very clear that in some of these, and we stick to industry for a bit, but that there is, you know, what we did with motors or with LEDs or with solar, this whole idea of aggregating demand. Now we are doing it with electric buses. I think a lot of whether you think it's even a you know, is that a good idea to think about sort of pooling demand for some clean fuel transition across MSMEs, and you know, who could be some, I mean, this is something we can take to BE, or I mean, any thoughts on that?
No, I think that you know, the SMEs have other challenges, so I don't think this is on their top of mind challenge. So I think we need, for SMEs, you need to do more holistic transformation, which includes everything to do with air pollution, sustainability, energy, etc. But included in that transformation, what is working for SMEs generally is that if you have an industry supply chain, you know, I think it's much easier to transform that entire supply chain, because there is a customer who's interested, you know, an automaker or whoever, and that these are suppliers, and you can work with them to get it done. So those type of interventions on SME are very successful. But generally speaking, I don't know, the way SMEs are sort of set up in our country is very difficult to deal with smaller units, you know, in aggregate. You have to find a way to sort of aggregate that learning, etc. And industry verticals are a good way to do it.
just quickly add is for SMEs, what we need to keep in mind that where are those common assets that you can create for them, where you can provide some support. And common boilers certainly is one approach. So it will be common boilers where you want to replace, say, the old archaic cupola furnaces, so and give better induction furnaces, help them with the fugitive emissions. So lot of these strategies need to be mapped out, and combustion technology in SMEs also need to be mapped out and see where the solutions are and whether we can create common support system for them. And that's where we are not being able to work out. And one very uniform strategy that you can take is the access to clean fuel. But that would really require a central level policy where you give them access and also work on the pricing. So therefore, it's not about a city specific or an industrial estate specific solution, but this really requires a more nationwide approach.
Thank you. Thank you. So yeah, now we'll switch gears from that. Mukta, you have been working in the Indo-Gangetic plane a little bit. So any reflections? I mean, it is sort of the most challenging area to work in terms of air pollution. So any reflections from your early work there? Any thoughts?
As you rightly said, recent experience with our somewhat limited experience. The reason why we chose to focus on IGP is, I think, plain obvious to everyone, right? It is affected by the worst air quality in India. But basis stakeholder consultations, what we noticed is that there is emerging will, there is motivation within different stakeholders, and also there is vibrancy of technical expertise. There is expertise and experience both available to be able to solve the barriers that Shri had earlier laid out, and those are exactly the kind of barriers that actually came out when we were doing our strategy for how do we focus our resources in the Indo-Gangetic plain. And what we finally, there's this one simple sort of approach that we found to be most effective over the last few years is that we work in coordination with whatever makes sense. So whether it is the national level, state level, or the city level, whatever makes sense, but do it gradually. So you first get, secure that trust and make sure that there is, like I said, the right expertise and the right strategic partnerships and collaboration is available at the nodal department level and also at the city level. Otherwise, there's no convergence, because otherwise you are just designing policies without local understanding of what the emissions are, and it differs. Like you said, Harsha and Anumita rightly, it differs. So to be able to have that understanding, the basic hygiene in place, which is highly technical, data driven, evidence backed, you have that in place, and with full understanding that it will not be sometimes it may not be reliable, sometimes it may not be complete, but then come up with smart hypothesis, because we have understanding of how it has worked in other places. So come up with smart hypothesis and then apply those control measures, maybe in a pilot. That's why the accelerator is so exciting, right? Because you have the ability to plan, you have the ability to pilot, you have the ability to work together in coordination with whoever's tasked with that. And there is a framework that is available. The best that we can do at this point of time is align with that framework and see if progress is measured with reduction in concentration, so be it. But there will be climate co-benefits, because finally the solutions are more or less overlapping. So I think that's what we figured out with our understanding in IGP, and we are going ahead with that. I think what is lacking is, I'm just reiterating your point here, is the monitoring, evaluation, and then feeding back the learning. So I'm very glad that that is actually one of the discipline that a project such as this actually brings in.
It's an aspiration. So Prakash, I mean, any reflections based on sort of your experience over the last 15 years working in this area, any learnings that you think would be useful for an initiative like this?
Yeah, thanks, Madhav. So having worked in the US for more than 20 years now, and I'm back here to continue that work. So there are, I think, few perspectives that I'd like to share. But I think something to be kept in mind is that just because a solution works there doesn't mean that it would work here. I think this is what was followed there, and then we try to take the best of that approach. So when we think about the approach that's followed in the US, the air quality management is mostly driven by the federal government and the state government. The cities do not really play a direct role in implementing the solutions. Now, for a country like India, I think the approach that's being followed here is probably best because the cities are large, you have huge population. So again, that's why I'm kind of re-emphasizing that we'll have to see how to customize the approach. But anyway, from the US perspective, that's how it's usually done. So they usually kind of design solutions and then implement it, followed by a good monitoring and evaluation component. The cities play an indirect role in terms of being able to implement these solutions by, for example, applying for grants for transitioning to cleaner vehicles, those types of things. So in terms of kind of few takeaway points that I can share is, I think that some of these have already been kind of mentioned by other panelists. Data transparency and accountability. I think that's a key thing. So once you have data available in the open domain, and everyone can assess the current conditions and track the progress over time. So that really helps everyone to be accountable, citizens, government, industries, everyone together, right? The other key thing is, which I feel could probably be added here, is arming the local bodies to be able to cite and fine the violators, right? So as far as I understand here, we need to get the judiciary system involved to be actually kind of get the have the violators accountable. So I think that providing that level of authority to the local bodies that actually implement the solutions would go a long way. And obviously there has to be some checks and balances, but of course we can get into that detailed discussion if needed. And so that is I think a key thing that definitely plays a role in trying to there are standard fine structures that are there that some of these cities and organizations follow, and for some really large events, then that kind of increases exponentially. The other thing is kind of developing accurate or more representative source inventories, understanding the primary sources, and kind of prioritizing the solution through science-based decision systems, right? I think that is important. I think Ms. Chowdhury already mentioned here about kind of not going after typical solutions, but rather kind of seeing what the science says, what the source contributions are, and then tackling those specific sectors with science-based solutions. I think someone else also brought this up about citizen involvement, and so that is some parts of India have pretty good awareness and engagement. Other parts do really need to step up. But I think that the active citizen engagement is a component of the air quality management framework there in the US. So anytime a rule is proposed, there is a citizen commentary period, and the agency that is drafting the rule has to respond to every single comment that is submitted by the citizens. Now, doesn't mean that they have to say yes to everything, but they have to justify why that works or doesn't work, and what's the alternative, or if this is not the right time to implement, when do we consider it? So that type of involvement, I think the citizens here need to step up. I believe that system is here. From what I heard from Dr. Gargava is that the response is not there, the engagement. So the citizens, we should step up, and when that commentary period is available, share your thoughts. I think you had already asked about kind of the different scales of engagement, involvement. So I mentioned the cities really don't kind of play a direct role, but some of these cities kind of group together and work from a regional perspective. So that kind of goes back to the airshed concept or the regional planning organizations. For example, in Southern California, where Los Angeles is located, so there are a few cities, or that whole region is kind of, in many regions within California, have what's called as air quality management districts, which would be kind of a combination of collection of districts that kind of collectively manage. And I know Santosh mentioned about kind of being careful with the use of this as a buzzword and not losing track, and I think that's a very good point. But I think the other thing to be kept in mind is some of these adjacent cities also face similar challenges, right? Same type of or similar levels of source impacts. And so by pooling resources together and addressing the same type of source sectors with a common control mechanism and intervention, may be also helpful kind of from kind of working with limited resources. So that's another thing. I think the other final thing that I wanted to mention is kind of also the setup for interaction between different types of stakeholders. So kind of here the Pollution Control Board has to interact with several different government agencies. So kind of making that setup easier, having participation from the different government agencies that would play a role in kind of implementing these regulations. So I think that would also kind of help this aspect. So I think those are some of the kind of the key points that I would like to share.
Thank you, and you actually did a good job summarizing the conversation so far. So, thank you. I mean, I think we'll just do one more round of any responses you may have, but I'll start with again Anumita. Two things, right? One, I think any advice you have as we embark into this. The other thing is, what can we help do also to actually capture all of the work that has gone in Delhi, whether it's on the regulatory side, drafts that never got into the system. So is there a way, is there a sort of a joint effort that could be put so that we don't lose all of that valuable learnings and also share with any of the other cities?
Yeah, so the learning that we can capture for others. One clearly is the role of mandate and target. CNG would not have happened if we did not give a regulatory mandate, okay, which had to be complied with, and if you didn't, there would be punitive action. Once the mandate and enforceable targets come into play, we have seen whichever sector we have seen that it happening, it certainly takes off. So, which is a very important takeaway for the future work. Having said that, the other thing is that you get a mandate, you get a target, and then you realize that you still have to work a lot more with the regulations. And I'll just give you one example. Today, as you mentioned earlier about the CND waste, today everyone is talking about recycling it and using it. But when it had started in Delhi in 2014, what was realized that under the laws and the rules in India then, the recycled material was not even legally allowed to be used in construction. So we had to fight a major battle to first get that law amended, to get recycled aggregates and etc. as an admissible construction material, right? So you also have to pay attention to those. Second, you may get a mandate to do CNG vehicle, or today now we are talking about electric vehicle. Then you really have to work on the standard regulations for proper product development. I mean, the amount of time, and people just don't know what kind of incremental effort had to be made to just get the right CNG technology. When the first technology came, there were a lot of glitches in it, and that's fair because your industry is producing it for the first time with no history at all, right? So clearly a lot more has to be, you have to pay attention to that. Second is the detail on the enforcement and implementation on ground. Clean air plan doesn't make sense, and we have seen this in Delhi, unless what you're asking for becomes part of the SOP and MIS of the department, right? If they have not opened up a file on what they have to do, then no progress reporting, evaluation, monitoring is ever possible. Third is the big challenge of take the demand management principles. So when Delhi started with a parking management area plan, and Delhi is the only city today to have notified rules on parking as a demand management measure. So But then what we realized that implementation of that as a demand management using pricing principle, planning principles, design principles, the skills don't exist in the institutions. And we are today still struggling that how do we make it happen on ground, right? The other big learning of Delhi, the second generation learning, which everyone has commented on, which played out in Delhi more, is this that only city focus is not going to help. So therefore, the new commission's policy approach, when they started, came up with a new policy on how do you do that for Delhi NCR and beyond, right? Then very consciously you actually had to think of not just these big cities of Delhi, Gurugram, Faridabad, but you actually had to classify that what happens to Panipat, Sonipat, to happen to Jhajjar, to, and then you realize that there is no framework in the country today that how do you deal with the smaller cities and towns even today, even though there is some approximate ideas been given, but clearly there is nothing in the institutions or regulatory or financial process that can address the small town issues, right? So taking it from there and the learning in Delhi, the other big thing came up in which Prakash actually pointed out that when you do city by city, you don't try to create all assets for each city. So it's not that I need a CNT recycling plant or a material recovery plant or a vehicle scrappage plant for each and every town and city. So how do you create cluster approach? Okay, that's a very big strategy going forward for entire country, even if when you're looking at the Indo-Gangetic plain. And that's what we are looking at today. Then making the connect between the hyper-local action to city action and the regional action that all of us talked about. At this moment, technically we all understand that needs to be done, but there is no clear framework how to do this. And when we know, and drawing upon some of the lessons, say in the US, they also have a Clean Air Act. Now, under the Clean Air Act, they've also established responsibility and accountability for the upwind polluters and the downwind impacts. Okay, so which means your Clean Air Action Plan for a city will also have to account for its downwind impact on some other city and town. So in Delhi NCR today, the data is emerging that how much pollution from outside is contributing to Delhi's pollution, how much Delhi is contributing to Noida's pollution. But we are not integrated, but this is seen more as then the politics is about shifting the blame somewhere else, right? But we are not translating that into that, therefore, how do I minimize my influence? So therefore, the good neighbor policy under the Clean Air Act of the US, we really need to bring in some of those to establish, that kind of principles and things like that. So I would say that, it's no rocket science. Now we just have to understand air pollution, clean air, climate change. These are only the high level outcomes, but what has happened for a long time in India, even the support that has come for Clean Air Action has always remained at the level of generate data, understand where the pollution coming. I like what Jamshed said, that is not about where the pollution is coming from, and we have kind of stuck at that level. Only now we are beginning to understand the action is actually in the sector, and that is linked to your development policy. Right, so you can't even de-link. I'm working on air pollution, therefore only this much, and I'm working on climate change. Okay, we don't even see the synergy amongst us, right? So I think those are the barriers that we'll certainly have to break and look into a lot more this kind of coordinated action and try and understand how the whole connect between hyperlocal to regional needs to happen. And therefore the city focus is good because the urban population, because of the concentration of the urban population, exposure levels are huge, and especially in the bigger cities and towns. But also keep in mind that today when we are looking at the air quality of both NCAP and non-NCAP cities, we just don't see any difference. We don't even understand the rationale between the NCAP program when you look at it from that perspective. That's it.
Harsha, any last thoughts from you for?
So I like the last statement from Anvita, so let me start from there. So what we are somehow missing is we are unable to learn what our own friends have done in some other cities and try to implement in some other place. So sector specific interventions like common boiler, I've seen it in 2018 and they have in Surat, which was implemented since last 3 4 maybe from 15 or something that implemented. And recently I was contacted by Rajasthan government telling that we want to do the same. So this is probably 10 years after some of our friends have done in Surat, right? So we have stone crushers which are NGTs behind them because of their issues in many parts of North India. And we have properly maintained stone crushers in some parts of the country which have come up with beautiful interventions. We need not run to some other country to see what happens. Right, construction sector is actually a very good example where most of us run behind, because I, being civil engineer, I like it more. So this is not the construction that I was taught when I was doing my BTech in 2003 2007, where you make a plan, then you have bricks, you lay the bricks, make a floor, go ahead. You have aluminum shutters, you just keep it, you dump concrete, and it's so fast, more efficient than what we all think, and it is less polluting. But do all construction people follow the same? No. Even big multi-story building, I have seen some of them not following the aluminum shuttering, which is probably done easily. But there are still bottlenecks regarding batching plant and so on and so forth. What I'm coming down to, there are interventions in our country for many sectors, but somehow we only talk about air quality as Delhi's problem. So we talk about clean fuel, we talk about vehicle scrapping policy as Delhi's problem. So I know all the old vehicles of Delhi after 10 years are getting shipped to Hyderabad and many other cities because the scrapping policy is different. So maybe we need to have country-wide, same sector-specific policies. We cannot have every city having its own policy. Okay, thank you.
Just like I think thinking about your question on scale again, I think one other response I had was, in addition to like figuring out things like, is this an important source, is this particular intervention sound, so forth. The other important factor or set of factors to consider when thinking about how ideas may scale is, I think, having a clear-eyed view on the institutional capacity that we are sort of expecting to be able to like do this. So if it is something that requires like a heroic increase in resources and so forth, then probably it's not going to happen. It might be a very good idea, but it may not. It's unlikely to like really scale up beyond a small pilot. So I think understanding the incentives of different actors, the challenges in institutional capacity or the requirements of institutional capacity from a particular action, factoring those in while prioritizing actions, while trying to figure out the types of interventions that could potentially scale beyond a particular city, potentially nationally. I think that's that's really important. The other brief point I wanted to make is that when it comes to governance support, right, we are, and perhaps I'm mistaken here, love for somebody to correct me, but I feel like we are at a fairly early stage of figuring out the right models of engagement. So for example, it's likely that like the PMUs, which are popular with like some of the other agencies, might be like a completely unknown thing for like pollution control boards. It's not obvious that the pollution control boards will find them useful, or that the PMUs will be able to respond to them effectively, right? So maybe that model works, maybe it doesn't, maybe there are caveats, there probably are. Figuring out sort of where that is, with technical support stuff in terms of implementation and like designing these, like the micro details of different policies, something that Anumita, I mean today and even in the past, repeatedly sort of stresses on, that it's not just about acha ye karna hai, lekin like how exactly are you going to do that, right? Like getting the finer details of it right, but being able to do that at a national level in India, like working with so many hundreds of cities, do we have enough organizations that can do that? And given that the answer is probably no, how do we sort of build that capacity, right? I think those are some of the challenges in front of us. And yeah.
From all that I heard, I mean, I'm absolutely not an expert, and it's after hearing everybody, what comes to my mind is that there's been effort, but it's been scattered, And now probably the best approach would be to be a little bit more systematic and intentional in everything that we do, so that it's not lost and that we are not again trying to reinvent what worked, what didn't work, what were the challenges, and waste any more time. So if we can, while we are working, and these 10 cities have put their hands up, and by proxy the states as well, to make sure that we have documentation systems, for enforcement, because yes, we have identified the measures and the policies, but then here are the systems that will help you with compliance, with enforcement, and then somehow find a way to make it open source, maybe gradually, if not immediately. I think it would be excellent.
Thank you. Prakash, do you want to say anything last?
I think everyone else has kind of summarized the key points. I'll just say NCAP is a great start. And I think the focus is at the right place, starting with the cities, because that's where the low-hanging fruits are, the primary emissions are for some of the immediately addressable solutions. And the goals are achievable. I mean, COVID lockdown provided a real-time experiment of what's achievable. Obviously, we cannot go to that extent, but it's just that it's within reach and we can do it. There needs to be just need the will to go through it.
Just quick one point I want to add here is that yes, we have talked a lot about the barriers, what's not working and working. Just want to keep in mind that at the end of the day, still things are happening across the country. Somewhere along the line, we have not understood that why they are not getting either replicated or scaled up at a scale. If today, if Indore is generating bio-CNG from its waste to run 400 buses, right? If Calcutta is using the Clean Air Fund to replace the solid fuel stoves with electric induction stoves, right? There are, or even the mobility action that is happening across different cities. Somewhere we are not being able to catch that as part of the larger scheme of and how to enable the scale and the speed of that change. And because we are so city focused, we are also losing sight of the role of the national policies and norms. Today, I mean, when I'm saying that we are seeing, air quality improving even in cap cities, it could be that your leapfrog to Bharat Stage 6, right? Or the fact that you have scaled up LPG transition in many cities. Somewhere this whole connect is missing, and we really need to do that more deliberately so that both national and state policies can come together and not work at cross purpose. That's something that has to be the focus.
Thank you. So, thank you to the panel. I'm not going to try to summarize. I think Prakash did a good job with the last round. A big round of applause for the panel. And thank you very much.